Police flashers painted the whitewashed facade of the Crystal Ballroom Wedding Hall in Plano with alarming flashes of blue and red. Detective Luke Reed parked his inconspicuous gray sedan a little away from the main cluster of squad cars. He climbed out, adjusted his tie, and surveyed the scene. The elegant two-story building with its columns and stained glass windows, which should have been the scene of one of the happiest days in the lives of two people, was now a scene of tragedy. Luca's shoes squeaked on the gravel walkway as he headed toward the main entrance. The patrol officer nodded to him and lifted his police tape. "Detective Reed." Luca showed his badge, though most of the Plano Police Department knew him by sight. "What do we got?" "The bride was shot during the ceremony, sir. The guests were horrified. The paramedics pronounced her dead on the spot, shot in the chest, almost to the heart." The officer checked his notebook. "Victim is Ruby Taylor, 25 years old. According to witnesses, the shooter was an ex-boyfriend, one Drew Foster, age 27. He fled before the first patrol arrived." Luca nodded and walked inside the building. The foyer was clustered in groups of people, guests in formal attire, now wrinkled and stained in places, faces contorted with shock and grief. Some were crying, some were talking quietly, others were frozen in a daze. The patrol officers were recording statements. Luca walked past them and entered the main hall. The space was decorated in white and peach colors with fresh flowers and flowing fabrics. Rows of guest chairs were overturned and scattered. Apparently panicked people were trying to take cover or rush away. At a makeshift altar adorned with an arch of flowers, forensic technicians in gloves and booties worked around a woman in a wedding dress, prostrate on the floor. The cream silk was stained dark red, and Luca involuntarily recalled his own wedding 11 years ago. His ex-wife, Jessica, had been wearing a cream dress then, too, and they had seemed so happy. "Detective Reed." He was brought out of his thoughts by the voice of Miles Croft, the medical examiner, who rose from his knees beside the body and pulled off his rubber gloves. "Definitely a gunshot wound. Caliber looks like 9mm. The bullet went through the chest and into the heart. Death was almost instantaneous." "Time of death?" "Based on witness statements and the condition of the body, approximately between 14:30 and 15 hours. I'll know more after the autopsy." "Did they find a weapon?" "No, looks like the shooter took it with him." Luca squatted next to the body, scrutinizing the victim's face. Even in death, Ruby Taylor was beautiful. Dark hair arranged in an elegant style, clear skin and expressive features. Her brown eyes were wide open, a look of surprise in them, as if she hadn't believed until the last moment that this was happening to her. "Who found the body?" "Everyone." Miles nodded toward the overturned chairs. "The gunman burst in during the ceremony when everyone was here, shouted something accusing, fired a shot, and fled in the general panic. Some of the guests tried to apprehend him, but he was armed, and no one wanted to risk it." Luca stood up and looked around the room, noting the location of doors, windows, and where the gunman had stood. "Had anyone recorded the ceremony?" "Yes, a professional videographer. He's in shock, but the camera was still recording when it happened. Tech already took the equipment." "Good," Luca nodded. "Where's the groom?" "In the side prep room. Officer Chen is with him." Luca went through the side door and found himself in a small room where brides and grooms usually prepare for the ceremony. There, a man in a black suit with a loosened bow tie was sitting on a couch. His face was pale, his eyes reddened. His hands trembled slightly as he looked up at the detective who had entered. "Mr. Kowalski?" Luca introduced himself and showed his badge. "Detective Luca Reed. I'm very sorry for your loss, but I need to ask you a few questions." Vance Kowalski nodded, his eyes glassy, as if he still couldn't fully comprehend what had happened. "Do you know Drew Foster?" "Yeah." Vance's voice was hoarse. "He's Ruby's ex-boyfriend. They broke up about 8 months ago. Do you know why they broke up?" "He was, obsessed with her. Too controlling, possessive. Ruby said she felt caged. Did Mr. Foster have any reason to be angry with Ms. Taylor? Vance rubbed his face with his hands. Other than the fact that she'd left him and was going to marry me? I don't know. Maybe that's reason enough for a psychopath. What exactly happened today? What did Foster say when he barged in? We were exchanging vows. Ruby had just finished hers, and I was starting to talk when the doors opened with a bang. He came running in with a gun in his hand, screaming that she killed him, that she knew about the disease and was with him anyway. Something about HIV. Then there was a gunshot, screaming, everyone scattering. I tried to get to Ruby, but the crowd pushed me back. When I finally made it to the altar, she was already there. Vance covered his face with his hands, and his shoulders shook with silent sobs. Mr. Kowalski, Luca said, quietly but firmly. Did you know Ms. Taylor had HIV? Vance looked up at him, his eyes reddening with genuine surprise. Bull. What? No, that's bullshit. Ruby didn't have HIV. That's just the ramblings of a lunatic. When was the last time you saw Drew Foster before today? A few months ago. He came to Ruby's restaurant, made a scene, threatened her. Security escorted him out, and she filed for a restraining order. A restraining order? Luca frowned. Are you sure? Yeah. I took her to the police station myself. Look, he was stalking her, calling her at night, waiting outside the restaurant. She was afraid of him. And yet, he managed to get into your wedding. Vance shook his head. We had security at the entrance. I don't know how he got in. We'll find out. Luca made a note in his notebook. Do you have any idea where Drew Foster might be hiding? I have no idea. Maybe in his apartment or at work. He's a chef at Blue Olive in downtown Plano. Thank you, Mr. Kowalski. If you think of anything else, please contact me. Luca handed him a business card. An officer will escort you home when you're ready. We'll need your formal statement tomorrow at the station. Leaving the room, Luca headed toward the group of guests, among whom stood out a young woman of Asian appearance in a peach bridesmaid's dress. Unlike the others, she seemed strangely collected, almost aloof. Her eyes were dry and her hands were calmly folded in her lap. Miss Chen? Luca approached her. I'm Detective Reed. May I ask you a few questions? Chloe Chen looked up at him and nodded. They stepped aside where they could talk in relative privacy. You were a close friend of Ruby Taylor's, correct? Yes. We've known each other since college. Her voice was smooth, almost mechanical. I work with her at the Ruby restaurant. I'm the assistant manager. And how long did you know Drew Foster? Something flashed in her eyes, so quickly that Luca wasn't sure if he was imagining it. About 3 years, since he and Ruby started dating. How would you describe their relationship? Chloe shrugged slightly. It was good at first. He's a talented chef. She's a successful restaurateur. They seemed to have a lot in common. But then, she paused. Drew became possessive, jealous of everything, her work, her friends, even me. It depressed Ruby. Did you keep in touch with Drew after they broke up? There's that fleeting look again. No. After they broke up, I only saw him when he came to the restaurant to make a scene. What can you tell us about the allegations today? About Ruby having HIV and knowing about it but not telling Drew? Chloe lowered her eyes. It's not true. Are you sure? Luca watched her reaction carefully. You were a close friend of hers. If she had any serious health problems, you would probably know. Ruby didn't have HIV, Chloe said firmly, but avoided his gaze. Drew went crazy with jealousy, that's all. Did you see the murder happen? Yes, I was standing next to Ruby as chief bridesmaid. Chloe spoke smoothly, like she was recounting a movie scene, not describing her best friend's murder in front of her. Drew broke into the hall, yelling some bullshit about how she'd gotten him HIV and knew it. Then he pulled out a gun. It all happened so fast. The gunshot, the screaming, the panic. When I tried to help Ruby, it was too late. Luca was staring at her. Her calmness was unnatural. Either she was in deep shock or… Ms. Chen, where were you this morning, say at 10 o'clock? At the beauty parlor with Ruby and the rest of the bridesmaids, she answered without hesitation. Then we drove here together to get ready for the ceremony. Does Drew have any places he could go to hide? I don't. Maybe his apartment? Or a motel of some kind? She shook her head. I really have no idea. Luca nodded and handed her a business card. If you think of anything that might help us find him, please call. And, Ms. Chen, please accept my condolences for the loss of your friend. Chloe took the business card and nodded, but no emotion was reflected in her eyes. Leaving the crime scene, Luca turned to the head of the forensic team. I want every inch of this room examined, especially look for signs of forced entry. If there was security at the entrance, how did he get in? Already on it, detective. And check all the guests against the guest list. Maybe he had an accomplice. Back at the precinct, Luca set up a search operation for Drew Foster. The suspect's photo was distributed to all patrols, and possible hiding places were checked: his apartment, his work, and the homes of friends and relatives. A wanted bulletin was sent to neighboring counties and traffic police. While the search was underway, Luca immersed himself in researching the history of the relationship between Ruby and Drew. He requested data on the restraining order Vance had mentioned, studied both men's social media accounts, and reviewed surveillance footage from Ruby's restaurant, where Drew had allegedly caused scandals. He was particularly interested in the HIV allegation. If it was true, the motive for murder was becoming much more serious than just jealousy of a jilted boyfriend. Luca requested Ruby Taylor's medical records, which wasn't easy without a warrant, but given the severity of the crime, the judge quickly signed off on the authorization. It was deep into the evening, when most of the staff had gone home. Luca was still sitting at his desk, studying the paperwork. He couldn't help but think of his 15-year-old daughter Emma, who was now probably angry that he hadn't come home on time again. But every time he saw the pictures of a smiling Ruby Taylor, whose life had been cut short so suddenly, he knew he couldn't stop until he found answers. The silence of the office was broken by the phone ringing. "Detective Reed," he answered. "Detective, this is Dr. Simon from Plano General Hospital. We've received your inquiry regarding Ruby Taylor's medical records." "Yeah, and?" I reviewed her chart. Ms. Taylor was indeed HIV positive. The diagnosis was made approximately 14 months ago. Luca straightened up in his chair. "Are you sure?" Positive. I've got all the test results and follow-up treatment records right here. She was on regular antiretroviral therapy. The last time she picked up the medication was 3 weeks ago. So she's known about her diagnosis for over a year. Yes, and the records show she was explained all the legal aspects, including the obligation to inform her partners of her status. Thank you, doctor. Can you forward me those records? Already sent it to your work email. Do you need anything else? No, that's enough. Luca hung up the phone and leaned back in his chair, contemplating the information he'd received. It was a complete game changer. If Ruby knew her HIV status and deliberately didn't tell Drew, she'd effectively put him at risk of death. That was a felony in some states. Not an excuse for murder, of course, but a very strong motive. He opened his email and began to look through the medical records he'd sent. There were test results, counseling records, and prescriptions. Everything confirmed that Ruby had known about her diagnosis for at least 14 months. If her relationship with Drew ended 8 months ago, that means she'd been hiding her status from him for 6 months. What about Vance? Did he know? Judging by his reaction, no. Or he's a very good actor. Luca rubbed his tired eyes. It was late and Drew Foster was still at large. Tomorrow was going to be a busy day. Gathering his paperwork, he turned off the desk lamp and headed out of the station. On the way, he met the night watchman. "Any news on Foster? Call me immediately, no matter what time it is," Luca said. "Yes, sir." Sitting in his car in the parking lot of the police station, Luca once again reviewed the crime scene photos on his tablet. The images reflected the chaos and tragedy, But there was something else, something he couldn't quite grasp yet. Some detail kept him on his toes. He sighed and started the engine. The morning would be wiser in the evening. Tomorrow, with a fresh head, he would continue to unravel the tangle of lies and betrayal that had led to tragedy on a day that should have been Ruby Taylor's happiest. Luca Reed arrived at the station early in the morning after a sleepless night. 2 cups of strong coffee had not completely banished the fatigue, but it had sharpened his senses and focused his attention. He settled in his office in front of a whiteboard, where he had already hung crime scene photos, snapshots of the key players in the case, and a timeline of known events. In the center of the board is a portrait of Ruby Taylor from her social media page, a smiling young woman with dark hair and bright eyes. Next to it is a photo of Drew Foster, a dark-haired man with sharp facial features and a piercing gaze. Next, pictures of Vance Kowalski and Chloe Chen. With red threads, Luca connected the photos, marking the relationship between the characters in this drama. He was bothered by Chloe Chen's strange behavior. Too calm for someone who had just lost her best friend. Plus, he noticed her reaction to the mention of Drew Foster. Something flashed in her eyes. Interest? Fear? He couldn't tell yet. A phone call interrupted his musings. "Detective Reed," he answered. "Sir, this is Officer Parks. We found Foster's car in the parking lot of the Sunset Inn Motel on the outskirts of town. An extraction team is on the way." "I'm on my way." Luca grabbed his jacket and hurried to the exit. 20 minutes later, he was already there. The Sunset Inn Motel was a typical 2-story G-shaped structure with an open parking lot. Police cars blocked the exits, and officers in tactical gear took up positions. "He's in room 23, second floor," the tactical lieutenant reported. The receptionist confirmed that a man matching the description had checked in last night under his real name. Paid cash for 3 nights. "Is he armed?" "Presumably, yes. It's the same gun that killed Taylor." Luca nodded and put on a bulletproof vest handed out by one of the officers. "I want to talk to him before the assault. It might be possible to avoid the shooting." Taking the megaphone, Luca stepped out into the open, but kept a safe distance from the door of room 23. "Drew Foster, this is Detective Luca Reed of the Plano Police Department. The building is surrounded. Come out with your hands up and no one will get hurt." Silence. Then the room door slowly opened. "I'm unarmed," came a male voice. "Don't shoot. Come out slowly, hands behind your head." A man emerged from the door, tall, with dark, disheveled hair and stubble on his haggard face. His eyes were red from crying or lack of sleep, or maybe both. He held his hands behind his head and slowly walked out onto the open balcony of the second floor. "On your knees," Luca commanded. Drew obediently knelt, and the tactical team immediately moved up the stairs to restrain him. One of the officers put his hands behind his back and cuffed him while the others searched him and checked the room for weapons. "Clear," reported the officer as he left the room. "They found a pistol, 9mm caliber, in the bathroom under the sink. It appears to be the murder weapon." Drew didn't resist as they led him to the police car. His eyes were empty, as if his life had already left him. In the interrogation room at the police station, Luca sat across from Drew Foster. He looked resigned to his fate. His hands, now free of the handcuffs, lay slack on the table. "Mr. Foster, do you understand your rights? You don't have to talk to me without an attorney." "I understand everything," Drew replied quietly. "And I don't need a lawyer. I did what I did." Luca turned on the tape recorder and introduced everyone present for the recording. "Tell me what happened yesterday at the Crystal Ballroom Wedding Hall." Drew took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "I killed Ruby, shot her in the chest, then I ran away. Simple as that." "But why, Mr. Foster? What made you do such a thing?" Drew looked up, and in his eyes, Luca saw a mixture of pain and rage. "She killed me, Detective. Slowly, but surely. A week ago, I found out I had HIV. His voice shook. I didn't understand how. I hadn't had any other partners since Ruby. I started digging and found out she'd known about her status for over a year. All that time. He clenched his fists. The whole time she knew and didn't tell me. Condemned me to a lifelong illness, to fear, the stigma, to having to take medication for the rest of my days. How did you know she knew her status? I hacked into her email account. I knew her password from when we were together. There were letters from the doctor, test results, everything. She was diagnosed 14 months ago. We dated for another 6 months after that, and she never once... Drew shook his head, not finishing the sentence. What happened when you found out? I lost my mind. I couldn't believe the person I loved could do that to me. At first, I just wanted to talk to her, get her to confess. But when I saw the invitation to her wedding on social media, he grinned bitterly. She was about to start a new life with a new man, and I was left with a life sentence. It didn't seem fair to me. Too unfair. How did you get into the wedding? There was security. Back door, Drew shrugged. I'm a chef, remember? I know the layout of most of the banquet halls in town. I just waited for the catering staff to go out for a smoke and slipped in. No one notices the black clothes and the concentrated face. You look like one of the caterers. And the gun? Bought it on the black market 2 weeks ago, after I found out about the diagnosis. At first I thought... He hesitated. Thought I'd use it on myself. What exactly happened at the gym? I was hiding in the back until I heard the priest talking about exchanging vows. Then I came out and I saw them all there, happy, celebrating. She stood so beautiful in her dress, hypocritically promising love and fidelity to some man when she felt neither for me. His voice shook with restrained emotion. I screamed that she knew about the disease, that she had killed me. Then I pulled out my gun and fired, aimed for her heart, wanted her to die as quickly as my dreams had died when I learned of the diagnosis. Luca watched Drew closely. There was something wrong with his story, some elusive falsity, but Luca couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. All the facts matched the witnesses' statements, but something still seemed wrong. Do you regret what you've done? Drew was silent for a long moment, then shook his head. I don't know. Part of me realizes that I committed a terrible, unforgivable act. The other part still feels that it was just, that she deserved it. Do you have proof that it was Ruby who gave you HIV? Who else? Drew asked bitterly. I wasn't with any other women after her. I still loved her, even after we broke up. Did anyone else know about your diagnosis? About your intention to go to the wedding? Drew shook his head. No, it was just my decision. My revenge. Luca paused, flipping through his notes. You said you were aiming for the heart. Do you have any experience with firearms? I've shot a couple of rounds at the range, that's all. But at that distance, it's hard to miss. Still, that was a pretty accurate shot for a beginner. The bullet passed only 2 centimeters from his heart. Drew shrugged. Luck, I guess. Or adrenaline. I don't know. Luca decided to change the subject. Do you know Chloe Chen? At the mention of that name, something flashed in Drew's eyes. Anxiety? Fear? But it quickly disappeared. Yeah, she's Ruby's best friend. Works with her at the restaurant. What was your relationship with her? Nothing special. Just acquaintances, that's all. She was always on Ruby's side. Are you sure about that? Maybe there were some, personal moments? Drew frowned. No, nothing like that. Why are you asking? Just getting all the details, Luca answered evasively. What were you doing between the murder and the arrest? Driving around the city aimlessly, thinking. Then I decided there was no point in running, so I got a motel room. I was going to turn myself in this morning, but you beat me to it. Luca nodded and turned off the recorder. Mr. Foster, you will now be escorted to your cell. You'll appear before a judge tomorrow for arraignment. I recommend you retain the services of an attorney. As Drew was led away, Luca sat in the empty interrogation room, analyzing what he'd heard. Foster's story sounded coherent and consistent with the facts. but his intuition told Luca that something didn't add up. Drew's look at the mention of Chloe, his overly accurate shot for a rookie, and some other little things that Luca couldn't quite grasp yet. Returning to his desk, the detective began to methodically build a chronology of events, drawing a timeline on a piece of paper, noting the key moments. 14 months ago, Ruby finds out she's HIV positive. 8 months ago, Ruby and Drew break up. A week ago, Drew finds out she's HIV positive. Yesterday, murder at the wedding. He accompanied each paragraph with questions. Why didn't Ruby tell Drew about her diagnosis? Did Vance know about her HIV status? What was the real reason Ruby and Drew broke up? How did Drew get into the banquet hall despite security? Why was his shot so accurate? Luca decided to watch the wedding videotape one more time. The tech department had already processed the footage from the videographer's camera, and Luca ran the video on his computer. The footage showed the festively decorated hall, smiling guests, solemn music. Here was Vance Kowalski standing at the altar waiting for the bride. Here was Ruby walking down the aisle in a snow-white dress with her father. The ceremony begins. The priest speaks of love and fidelity. Ruby says her vows. Vance begins his... And then the doors swing open. Drew Foster appears, his face contorted with anger. He yells something about betrayal and sickness. A gun appears in his hand. The guests start screaming and ducking. The videographer also ducked, and the camera now shows mostly the floor and people's feet, but the sound continues to be recorded. A gunshot is heard, then screams of terror. Luca rewound the tape and re-watched several times the moment when Drew runs into the hall and pulls out a gun. Then he zoomed in, trying to catch every detail, and then he noticed something strange. At the moment when Drew is pointing the gun at Ruby, the camera shows Chloe Chen standing next to the bride, and her expression doesn't look like horror or fear at all. It looks more like determination, expectation. Luca made a note to check exactly where Chloe was standing at the time of the shooting. The videotape didn't show it, but perhaps the crime scene photos or the testimony of other witnesses could shed some light on the matter. Just as he was about to return to his notes, the duty officer entered the office. "Detective Reed, there's a visitor for you. Says it's about the Taylor case." "Chloe Chen." Luca nodded, surprised at the coincidence. "Escort her to interview room 2. Chloe Chen looked as composed as she had at the crime scene yesterday. She was wearing a strict, dark suit. Her hair was gathered in a neat bundle. Only her eyes gave away her inner tension. They were flushed, as if she had been up all night. "Ms. Chen," Luca greeted her. "How can I help you?" Chloe looked him straight in the eyes. "I've come to confess, Detective. I killed Ruby, not Drew." Luca carefully hid his surprise and sat down across from her, turning on the recorder. "Tell me what happened." Drew did show up at the wedding with a gun. He yelled at Ruby, blamed her, and he was right. She knew about her HIV status and kept it from him. Chloe spoke in a monotone, like a memorized text. When Drew pointed the gun at Ruby, he hesitated for a second. At that moment, I grabbed his arm. We started to struggle for the gun, and in that struggle, a shot was fired. The bullet hit Ruby. "Are you saying it was an accident?" "No." Chloe shook her head. "I deliberately pointed the gun in her direction. I wanted her to die." "Why?" "Because she ruined Drew's life. She knew she was sick, and she was still with him without telling him. That's unforgivable." Luca scrutinized her face. There were a lot of inconsistencies in her story. "Ms. Chen, your story is contradicted by the witnesses. No one saw you and Drew fight over the gun. It happened very quickly. People panicked, a lot of people ducked. No wonder no one noticed. Mr. Foster just confessed to the murder. He said he shot Ruby himself." Chloe froze for a moment, her eyes widening. "He's, protecting me. But it's not true. I killed her." "Why would Mr. Foster protect you?" Chloe lowered her gaze. "Because he knows I did it for him." "You love him." It was not a question, but a statement. Chloe was silent for a long moment, then nodded. "Yes, I have for years." ever since he started dating Ruby. But he never noticed me. She was all he ever cared about. And that's why you killed your best friend? She wasn't my friend. A real friend doesn't do that to people. She used Drew knowing he loved her. She hid the disease from him, risked his life. And when she didn't need him, she just threw him away and moved on. Like nothing happened. Chloe clenched her fists. I watched him suffer after they broke up. And then when he found out about his diagnosis, it was the last straw. I couldn't let her just walk away and be happy after everything she'd done. So, you knew about Drew's diagnosis before he was killed? Chloe hesitated, realizing her mistake. Yeah, he, told me. That's odd, because he'd just claimed he hadn't told anyone about his diagnosis. A blush flooded Chloe's cheeks. He could have forgotten. It was a difficult time for him. Or you're lying, Ms. Chen. Luca stepped forward. Here's what I think. You really loved Drew Foster, and you really hated Ruby for the way she treated him. You may have even known about her HIV status before you found out about Drew, but I don't believe you shot her. I insist it was me. Arrest me. Not until I'm sure you're telling the truth. Luca leaned back in his chair. Tell me in detail how it happened. What hand did you use to grab the gun? How exactly did you fight Drew? Where exactly did the bullet hit? Chloe began to describe the events, but with each detail in her story appeared more and more inaccuracies and contradictions. Luca methodically pointed out each of them, driving her into a corner. Ms. Chen, you're trying to take the blame for a crime you didn't commit. The question is, why? Chloe lowered her eyes, her restraint beginning to crumble. I love him, she said quietly. I've been in love with him for 4 years. All this time I've watched him idolize Ruby, suffer for her. I've always been there for him, always supported him, but he's never seen me as anything but a friend of his girlfriend. When he came to the wedding with the gun, I thought, this is my chance. If I take the blame, if I sacrifice myself for him, maybe then he'll finally see me, see my love. Luca looked at her with understanding and pity. Ms. Chen, do you realize that falsely confessing to murder is a serious crime? I don't care. I would do anything for Drew. Even if he is a murderer? Even if he shot a woman on her wedding day? He had a right to revenge, Chloe exclaimed passionately. Ruby had effectively sentenced him to a life sentence. She deserved what she got. Luca tapped his fingers on the table thoughtfully. You said that Drew told you about his diagnosis. When exactly did that happen? 3 days before the wedding. He was desperate, didn't know what to do. I advised him to go to the police, but he said the usual punishment wasn't enough for her, that she should feel the same pain she'd caused him. And you supported his plan to kill her? No, I mean... Chloe was confused. I didn't think he'd actually do it. I thought he was just trying to scare me. But when I saw him at the wedding with a gun, I knew he was serious. And yet, you didn't try to stop him. Yeah, I don't know. It all happened so fast. Luca turned off the recorder. Ms. Chen, I appreciate your loyalty to Mr. Foster, but a false confession won't help him or you. Forensics, ballistics, and eyewitness testimony will confirm who actually fired the shot. I still insist that it was me, said Chloe stubbornly. In that case, I have to detain you for further investigation. Luca stood up and signaled to the officer on duty. Escort Ms. Chen to her cell, and please give her the opportunity to contact a lawyer. As Chloe was led away, Luca returned to his desk, pondering the developments. He now had 2 confessions to the same murder, and he wasn't sure which one was true. Perhaps both contained elements of truth. Luca requested the results of the gunpowder residue tests from Drew Foster's hands, as well as ballistics tests on the gun they'd found. Then he began interviewing other witnesses to the wedding, trying to find out if anyone had seen the shooting happen and where exactly Chloe had been at that moment. By evening, the picture began to clear up, but there were still a lot of questions. Luca felt that behind this crime was not just the jealousy of a jilted boyfriend, but a complex triangle of passion, betrayal, and obsession, in which Drew was only one side. The morning of the third day of the investigation began for Luca Reed with a folder of forensic results on his desk. The detective rubbed his eyes, reddened from lack of sleep, and plunged into the study of documents. The ballistics report confirmed that the gun found in the motel was the murder weapon that killed Ruby Taylor. Drew Foster's fingerprints were found on the handle of the gun, and no trace of Chloe Chen. Tests for gunpowder residue showed a significant amount of it on Foster's right hand, consistent with a recent gunshot. Luca leaned back in his chair, mulling over the information. Everything pointed to Chloe lying in her confession. The physical evidence clearly supported Drew's version. He had fired the fatal shot. Detective Reed, Officer Donovan, entered the office. The results of the witness interviews from the wedding. I thought you might be interested in this. Luca picked up a new folder and quickly went through the reports. 3 witnesses independently testified that Chloe Chen was not next to Ruby and Drew at the time of the shooting, as she claimed, but a few meters away from them, against the side wall. There had been no struggle for the gun. Well, Luca muttered to himself, it's time to talk to our suspects again. The first thing he did was to go to the detention cell where Chloe was kept. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, but her eyes were still determined. Ms. Chen, Luca began, as soon as they were seated in the interrogation room, I have the results of the examination and witness statements. They refute your version of events. Chloe was silent, looking at the table. Only Drew's prints are on the gun. On your hands there are no traces of gunpowder. 3 witnesses saw you against the wall at the moment of the shot, not next to Drew as you claimed. Luca paused. You didn't shoot Ruby, Ms. Chen. That's not true, Chloe said quietly, but her voice was no longer as confident as before. Why are you protecting him? Luca stepped forward. He killed a man, Chloe. He may have had his reasons, but he committed a crime, and he has to answer for it. You don't understand. She finally raised her eyes full of tears. Drew is a good man. He doesn't deserve to spend the rest of his life in prison for being driven to extremes. Did Ruby deserve to die? Chloe hesitated, then slowly shook her head. No, probably not. But I understand why he did. She condemned him to a life with HIV, knowing her status. It's almost like a slow murder. Tell me the truth, Chloe. What really happened? For a long time, Chloe was silent, as if weighing the pros and cons. Finally, she took a deep breath. I knew about Ruby's HIV status from the beginning. She told me as soon as she found out the diagnosis. I was the only one she trusted with the secret. Chloe swallowed. I begged her to tell Drew, but she was afraid he'd leave her. She said she'd tell him soon, but she just had to find the right moment. But weeks and months went by, and she wouldn't say a word. Why didn't you tell Drew yourself? I couldn't betray her trust. Chloe grinned bitterly. Ironic, isn't it? I kept her secret that could hurt the man I loved, protected her, even though I knew what she was doing was wrong. What changed? Why did Ruby end up breaking up with Drew? She met Vance. He was rich, successful, could give her the stability she always wanted. And Drew? Chloe shook her head. Drew was talented, but not ambitious. Ruby knew that with him, she would never achieve the level of luxury she dreamed of. And Vance knew about her HIV status? Yes. It was a business marriage of sorts. He knew about her diagnosis, but he didn't want sex. He wanted a presentable wife for his social image, and she needed his money and status. Chloe wiped away a tear. When Drew came to me a week ago and told me he was HIV positive, I was horrified. I realized I couldn't keep quiet anymore. I told him everything, that Ruby had known about her status for over a year, that she'd deliberately kept it from him, that her marriage to Vance was a done deal. He was crushed. I'd never seen such desperation in a man's eyes. So he decided to get revenge? At first, he just drank. Then he started talking about how Ruby couldn't just walk away from responsibility, start a new life when his life was ruined. I tried to calm him down, offered to sue, but he said that ordinary justice wasn't enough for her. Chloe sighed. I didn't think he'd actually decide to kill. I thought it was just drunken talk, a way to blow off steam. But he did. Yeah. The day of the wedding, he called me and told me he was gonna do what he said he was gonna do. I panicked. I tried to talk him out of it, but he'd already made up his mind. Chloe looked up at Luca. When I saw him in the hall with the gun, I knew I had to do something. Stop him. But I froze. Part of me wanted Ruby to pay for what she did to him. Is that why you took the blame? Out of guilt? Partly. And because I love him, I always have. Her voice shook. I thought if I took the blame, at least that way I could protect him. Give him a chance for a future. Even at the cost of my own freedom? Yes, Chloe answered simply. It would be worth it. Luca shook his head, amazed by the depth of her feelings and sacrifice. Miss Chen, false confession of murder is a serious crime. However, given the circumstances and your willingness to cooperate now, I think the prosecutor may be lenient, but you'll need a good lawyer. Chloe nodded, looking both relieved and devastated. What would happen to Drew now? He'll be charged with first-degree murder. Given the circumstances, his lawyer would probably push for murder by passion, which might mitigate the sentence, but he won't be able to avoid jail time. Can I see him? Chloe asked hopefully. After the formal charges are filed, maybe, Luca answered, although he doubted that Drew would appreciate Chloe's sacrifice as she hoped. Leaving Chloe's cell, Luca headed toward Drew Foster. He was sitting on the edge of his bunk, staring at the wall. When the detective entered, Drew didn't even look up. Mr. Foster, Luca began, I have some news. Chloe Chen has admitted that she tried to take the blame for the murder you committed. That made Drew look up, a flash of surprise in his eyes. What? Why would she do that? She claims to love you, that she always has. Drew looked genuinely shocked. Chloe? Loves me? But, she never... He hesitated. She'd always been just Ruby's friend. According to her, she's been hiding her feelings all these years. Watched you love another woman and suffered in silence. Luca stared intently at Drew. She also admitted that she knew about Ruby's HIV status from the beginning and didn't tell you, even though she could have. Drew clenched his fists. So she betrayed me too. They've all lied to me. She says she couldn't betray her friend's trust. She fought herself knowing it was wrong, but she couldn't find the strength to tell you the truth. Luca paused. But it was Chloe who told you the truth a week ago, wasn't it? After you found out about your diagnosis. Drew nodded slowly. Yes, I was desperate. I didn't understand how I got HIV. Came to her because she was the only link to Ruby. And that's when she told me everything. His face contorted in pain. About what Ruby knew. About her deal with Vance. About how she used me and then threw me away when she found a better deal. So you decided to kill her. Not right away, Drew admitted quietly. At first, I just wanted her to confess. To tell me to my face that she knew about her illness and had deliberately put me at risk. He shook his head. But when I pictured her standing at the altar with another man, starting a new life, knowing my life was ruined, I couldn't bear it. You realize you're facing a trial and probably a long prison sentence? Yes. Drew looked resigned to the thought. I knew what I was getting into when I pulled the trigger. But at the time, I thought it was worth it. And now? Drew was silent for a long moment, then answered, I don't know. Ruby's dead, but that didn't give me my health back. Didn't change the fact that I have HIV. He grinned bitterly. And now I'm also a murderer. Maybe revenge wasn't worth it. What about Chloe? She was willing to sacrifice her freedom for you. I never asked her to do that, Drew answered sharply, but then his tone softened. But It explains a lot. Why she was always there for me, why she supported me after I broke up with Ruby, when my other friends turned away. He shook his head. I was blind. All I saw was Ruby and no one else. Sometimes we don't see what's right in front of us, Luca said philosophically, remembering his own marriage, ruined because he'd noticed the problems too late. Leaving Drew's cell, Luca felt the investigation was coming to an end. All the basic questions had been answered, motives clarified, and the truth, however bitter, had come out. Back in his office, he sat down at his computer to compile a final report on the case. But first, he decided to double-check one detail that had been bugging him. Luca requested Chloe Chen and Vance Kowalski's phone records for the last 2 weeks. His intuition told him that there might be some connection between them that neither of them had mentioned. Indeed, the records showed 3 calls from Chloe's phone to Vance's phone the day before the wedding, and 1 on the morning of the ceremony. Why was the bridesmaid calling the groom, and so often, on the eve of the wedding? Luca called Vance Kowalski down to the station for further questioning. He arrived within the hour, still dressed in his black morning suit, a look of grief on his face. "Mr. Kowalski," Luca began after they were seated in the interview room. "Thank you for coming. I have some additional questions about the case." "Of course, Detective. I want Ruby's killer punished. We've determined that Drew Foster shot Ruby. He's already confessed to it." Luca watched Vance's reaction carefully. "But there are still some loose ends." "Like what?" "I think it's obvious. He was obsessed with her, couldn't stand the fact that she'd chosen me, and decided to take revenge. Mr. Kowalski, we know that Ruby had HIV, and that you knew about it." Vance visibly tensed. "Who told you that?" "Does it matter?" Luca stepped forward. "We also know the nature of your arrangement with Ruby. A marriage of convenience. You get a presentable wife for your social status. She gets financial stability and a life of luxury." "It wasn't exactly like that." Vance looked offended. "There were feelings between us, just more practical than is usually considered romantic." "Did you know Ruby hadn't told Drew about her HIV status when she dated him?" Vance looked away. "She mentioned that some of her former partners didn't know. I didn't ask for details." "And that didn't bother you? That she might have intentionally put people at risk of infection?" "Look, Detective, Ruby wasn't perfect," Vance sighed. "But she was terrified of her diagnosis, afraid of rejection, of the stigma. I'm not excusing her, but I understand. Now explain to me why Chloe Chen called you 4 times in the 2 days before the wedding." The question caught Vance off guard. He blinked, then licked his lips nervously. Chloe? Well, she was the chief bridesmaid. Probably wanted to go over the details of the ceremony. "Mr. Kowalski, I strongly advise you to tell the truth." Chloe already admitted that she knew about Drew's plans to show up at the wedding with a gun. If you also knew and failed to take action to prevent a tragedy, that makes you an accessory. Vance turned pale. "That's not true. Yeah, I didn't know he was going to shoot." He ran his hand through his hair. "Chloe called me the day before the wedding and told me that Drew had found out about his HIV status and was blaming Ruby, that he was furious and might come to the ceremony and make a scene. I beefed up security, alerted the staff." "But you didn't cancel the wedding? You didn't warn Ruby?" "Yeah," Vance hesitated. "Ruby wouldn't have canceled the wedding. She had too much invested in this day in our union. And I figured if Drew just made a scene, security would escort him out quickly." "You risked your fiancé's life to avoid canceling an expensive ceremony?" "I didn't think he was capable of murder." Vance raised his voice. "No one did. Yes, he was obsessed with her, but he didn't seem violent." Luca leaned back in his chair, assessing Vance's sincerity. He really didn't seem to have foreseen this outcome, though his decision not to warn Ruby was irresponsible, to say the least. "The morning of the wedding, Chloe called you again. What was that conversation about?" "She said that Drew had called her during the night, saying weird things about justice and retribution. She was afraid he might do something more serious than just disrupt the ceremony. I doubled the security, but Vance shook his head. Apparently, it wasn't enough. Why didn't you go to the police? We had no proof he was planning anything illegal, and Ruby had a restraining order against him. I thought that was enough. Vance looked genuinely remorseful. Look, if I'd known he was coming in with a gun, I would have canceled the whole thing, I swear. I didn't want Ruby dead. Luca decided that Vance was telling the truth. Reckless, but not criminal. Mr. Kowalski, I recommend you get a lawyer. Although you won't be charged with accessory to murder, Ruby's family could file a civil suit for your failure to take sufficient steps to protect her, knowing of the potential threat. Vance nodded, looking utterly defeated. I understand. Finished with Vance, Luca gathered up all the materials and finalized the case for submission to the prosecutor's office. Drew Foster was charged with aggravated first-degree murder. Chloe Chen was charged with obstruction of justice and perjury. Vance avoided prosecution, but, as Luca predicted, became the target of a civil suit from Ruby's parents. Late that night, after closing the case file, Luca finally allowed himself to relax. He stood at the window of his office, looking out at the nightlights of Plano, and pondered the nature of passion and betrayal. About how love can turn into obsession and feelings of injustice into a thirst for revenge. About how people sometimes fail to see those who truly love them, chasing illusions and mirages. The case was closed, justice would be served, but the bitter taste remained. 3 lives had been ruined, one cut short by a bullet, the other 2 doomed to years in prison, all because of lies, fear, and an inability to speak openly about their feelings. Luca sighed and picked up the phone. He dialed his daughter's number. "Dad?" Emma answered sleepily. "Are you still at work?" "Yes, honey, but I'm on my way home. I just wanted to tell you that I love you." "I love you too, Dad," she said, a smile in her voice. "I'll see you at home." Luca hung up the phone and took another look at the pictures of Ruby, Drew, and Chloe pinned to the board. 3 people bound by a web of love, hate, and lies. An eternal story of passion and betrayal, which, alas, was unlikely to be the last in his practice.